quite big on listening skills, and so my advice would be to listen more than you talk at first, because if you're listening, you can learn. And entering the workforce for the first time can be challenging, and especially in healthcare, where the pace of change is very fast. I think that listening and learning from the people who you're working with and for can help with a more smooth transition into the workforce. And I think along with listening is asking questions. We have an internship program here, and I've been really impressed by some of the students that come in who are in graduate programs, and at the way that they ask questions to understand. They're really trying to learn, but the way that they ask questions is in a really respectful way. And I can tell you that sometimes they ask such a great question as an outsider, but it makes us rethink, like, okay, we want to make sure that we're being clear with what we're trying to accomplish here. And maybe we're not being as clear as we can be, and it's so helpful to have somebody who comes in with a fresh perspective and can really just take everything in, learn, ask questions, and then contribute to how we might improve things.
That understanding how to frame what you're saying or what you're presenting is hugely important. And when we're in school, we're writing for our teachers, or we're writing for our classmates, or we're writing for ourselves to document that we've learned something. And that doesn't require much of an audience awareness necessarily. So if you can do a practicum or have other experience where you can show that you've learned how to put things in context, I think that's a terribly useful skill that not everybody shows up with. We have almost always had someone who was either a current undergraduate or a recent undergraduate who works with us for a period of months, helping out with any number of projects that I sort of have in my pocket. And some of them come in really well prepared for that, and others have no idea. Similarly, we have master's students doing practicums, some of whom get it and some of whom don't. And it's not, unless you've taken a behavior change communication class or a health communications class, you may not have gotten it. Yeah. And even if you did take those classes, depending on when you took them or where you took them, you may not have gotten it. But the notion of framing and putting things in context is really important.
Well, as you know, there's a difference between management and leadership. So I would say, as a manager, to really just have good antenna for the nuances of the job, and not only about relationships, but what people really want, what the organization as a whole wants, what your individual staff wants and needs, figuring out that balance between meeting some of the organizational goals, but also meeting the kind of day-to-day needs of your staff and your own. I mean, the manager, him or herself, always has to be attentive to his or her own needs and what sustains you, what nourishes you, what makes you continue to be passionate and interested in your job. We can sometimes get lost in the day-to-day work, and we forget that we have our own intellectual needs, our own emotional needs. Well, I think mentoring is important. In all of our jobs as younger people, it would be wonderful to have a mentor, or at least somebody that we could even watch from a distance to see what are the most effective management skills and tools. So that's not a very specific answer to your question, but watching and absorbing and reflecting on one's experiences, I think, is important. It's important to be humble about our positions as managers, but also to have a certain amount of confidence in our ability to make decisions and to communicate our ideas. So it's an interesting mix. It's tough. It's tough for even seasoned people to be good managers. So
There's always a balance. You gotta learn.
no matter what the job, no matter what the job that you're tasked with, and I say this to myself even today, no matter what the job is that we're doing, we can always learn something.
Yep.
We always have to stay in a learning mode and somehow have a repository, whether it's in our heads or on paper someplace, of all the things that we've learned. I do think that humility is a huge part of just being a good and responsible employee, no matter where you're positioned in the hierarchy. There's always a way to improve. There's always something to learn. There's always something to give back. In my former job, as I watched young people come in, even at the lowest levels, I was always attentive to the ones who rose up through. And we had one young woman who came in as a dishwasher, and honest to God, within a year, she had risen to really cooking. She had done her job as a dishwasher absolutely flawlessly. She always took on more responsibility. She took appropriate amounts of initiative. So, of course, people gave her more responsibility, and every time she was given additional responsibility, she did it beautifully. It doesn't mean that she knew everything. She asked appropriate questions, and little by little, she came to be known as that person who could always be reliable to do anything, and to do it with alacrity. I used to have that word written big in my office, which means I'll do it, and I'll do it with willingness and joyfulness. And she was great, and even though she was young enough to be my daughter and then some, I learned something from her about being a really good employee.
Ask a lot of questions, read a lot of stuff. I think it's important to understand your company culture. There are skills like fair labor standards everybody has to apply, but how a certain company institutes that is different. So figure out, how do you learn your role? What is your role? If you're a new manager, not been a manager before, read lots of stuff on what your role is from any industry. When I changed jobs, I went from supervising 6 people to 27. And so I was a little overwhelmed by that, and so I read articles that were, what should a manager do going from a small staff to a large staff, and really sort of understanding the context of it. I think the other piece that is important as a new manager is to really think about your individual goals and values, and I try to, I've had a number of supervisors, some that really were helpful to me and some that weren't. And what kind of manager did I want to be? And so I've spent a fair amount of time with that over time of, what do I want to be? I want to be supportive, but I don't want to be, dictator. How do I be flexible enough to give that person the growth and still get what I need as a manager, and just that whole balance of what it is and who do I want to be as a leader. Because whether you're a manager or not, you're a leader in all kinds of areas in your company and outside your company. And I think that is the biggest thing any one of us could do for ourselves is, who am I? What are my values? What am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? Because there are so many things every day that come up, and you really have to decide, okay, yep, that works, or no, that's not okay. And then having the courage and the language and the skills to be able to say to somebody, that didn't work, or we need to work on this moving forward, and those kind of awkward conversations. And that's a skill as a new manager. I think it's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most critical, to be able to just have that conversation and not have it be a big deal, and just say, we're having a conversation here. I noticed this. We need to move it from there to here.
and learn that skill. And to be able to ask questions. I think lots of times, I get an assignment or a request, and what somebody asks me, when I ask them a few more questions about what they asked me for, isn't going to answer the question that they really had. And so getting used to, in a very gentle way, saying, well, how are you going to use this information? And really making sure that it meets their needs. So those are some of the things I would recommend. I've used it a lot, asking lots of questions.
Great.
I would get to know your coworkers and the other people you're going to be interacting with. Find someone who can mentor you and teach you the different systems and the way things work within the organization that you're going to be working in. Because every organization is different in terms of how work gets done, the structure you need to go through for communication, and the expectations, and things like performance reviews and how does that work. So learning all of that when you get involved, trying to find, learning about the policies and procedures associated with each work plan. But then I think key is, as I mentioned in the beginning, as a new manager, it's developing what is your work plan and what are you going to try to get done, and making sure that your supervisor is on board with that, and the expectations are very clear for you as well, for who you are as a new manager and what your supervisor expects from you, as well as then if you are supervising people, what are your expectations from them, and how can they help you and how can you help them in terms of getting the work done and doing what needs to get done.
Excellent.